Welcome, everyone. My name is Liesbet Stevens. I am the Deputy Director of the Belgian Institute for the Equality of Women and Men, and I will be moderating this panel. The Institute for the Equality of Women and Men is the Belgian equality body for sex and gender. We are an independent, state-funded public institution, and we are tasked by the legislator to guarantee and promote gender equality by fighting any form of gender-based discrimination and inequality. In July 2020, the legislator made us competent to also fight non-consensual distribution of intimate images, or NCII. Ever since, the Institute has become the point of contact for all questions related to image-based sexual abuse, including sextortion, deep nudes, etc. And that's also why we believe it was important to organize this panel. All countries have to deal with image-based sexual abuse, but they all seem to do it in their own way. Many have criminalized NCII in some way or other, but the conditions differ. Some countries have criminalized the possession of NCII. In other countries, like Belgium, this is not a criminal offense. Some countries have specified that deep nudes are criminal offenses, for example, Pakistan, whereas others specified that it is not a criminal offense, for example, the UK. So there is a need to discuss what forms of image-based sexual abuse are an infringement of sexual autonomy and sexual consent online, but also how do we best control these infringements? And what role do social media and human rights organizations or equality bodies have in this matter? And to help us answer these questions, we have the privilege to welcome 4 experts here today. First, let me introduce to you Philipp Amann. Philipp is the head of strategy at the European Cybercrime Center of Europol. And this Cybercrime Center is responsible for assessing and acting on relevant trends and threats related to cybercrime and cybersecurity. Philipp is also a member of ENISA's Permanent Stakeholders Group, and ENISA is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. He previously held positions with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the International Criminal Court, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. Thank you for being with us, Philipp.
Thank you for having me.
We are also very happy to have Cindy Southward with us. Cindy has worked to end violence against women for over 25 years at international, national, state, and local advocacy organizations. And she is currently Facebook's new global head of women's safety. Prior to joining Facebook, she was the executive vice president at the US National Network to End Domestic Violence. She is the founder of the Safety Net Technology Project, and she's a founding board member of the Global Network of Women's Shelter. Catherine van de Heyning is professor in European Fundamental Rights Law at the University of Antwerp, and she focuses in her academic work on the impact of digitalisation on human rights. She is a researcher on the Antidote Project on NCII of the University of Antwerp, University of Liège, and University of Saint-Louis, Brussels. Up until the recent past, she counseled victims of NCII as a lawyer, but recently she joined the other side, the Public Prosecutor's Office. And so she now combines her academic tenure with her position as a public prosecutor. As an expert on this matter, she was invited to counsel the Belgian Parliament on the new legislation on NCII. And last but not least, David Wright is with us today. David has worked extensively in online safety for many years now. David is the director of the UK Safer Internet Centre, which is the National Awareness Centre and part of the European InSafe network. David counsels a number of governments and industry providers on online safety strategy and policy, and has recently been appointed as a child online protection expert advisor to the UN International Telecommunication Union. David has led pioneering work such as the establishment of the Helpline for victims of revenge porn. We will present 4 questions to our speakers, and at the end there will be room for a Q&A. So please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, but we will only go into them at the end of the panel. So let's dive right in. The first question that we have to deal with is, when is online sexual integrity and autonomy violated? Or in other words, when is consent needed? The fact that some countries criminalize some forms of image-based sexual abuse and others do not shows that lawmakers struggle to determine when exactly someone's sexual integrity has been violated. Catherine, as a lawyer, a professor, and now also a public prosecutor, when is consent needed in the digital world? And why do you think lawmakers struggle with this question so much?
That's simply not possible.
Catherine, we couldn't hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay. So, of course, I would like to start with a definition, but that's simply impossible, because I don't think that it's possible to just draw one global definition. But what we can actually provide are some criteria that would subscribe or give a clear view of what actually NCII would mean. And for me, there are 3 elements that you need to take into account. And the first one is, of course, what is a sexual image? And that sexual image is contextual and culturally dependent. And so probably what is a sexual image will not be the same in Belgium or in France than it is, for example, in some other countries, where there are other standards of what would be a sexual image. And I think in one of the cases, it was very well described what actually should be the standard for a sexual image. And it is something that you would not do if it were public. So some parts of your body that you would keep covered or hidden, or some activities, intimate activities that you would keep hidden. If you were to know it would become public, you wouldn't do that. And so what we are actually looking at, because there are several perspectives on this. Previously, you had a perspective much more on public morals and indecency. Today, actually, we draw the line on sexual integrity. And so when someone feels he's violated or she's violated in her sexual integrity, I think that's where we should draw the line, and that's where we should look at sexual images. So that's point 1, that's the sexual image. The second point is, and that's a new challenge, is whether it should actually be an image of a person, because we're now confronted with deep nudes, which are not the actual pictures of someone, but who are portraying as if it were that person. And so I think we should follow the line there, as well as we have drawn already on child pornography, that it is not important whether actually the person it's the real person who is being portrayed in public or online, but whether it's a realistic portrayal of that person. So I think with those 2 elements, you can already have a very good picture of whether this constitutes a sexual image, yes or no, taking into account that you always need to look at the context, and also that it's culturally dependent.
Okay, thank you. David, you have worked for many years on making the internet safer in general, but in 2015 you helped establish the UK revenge porn helpline, something we can only dream of in Belgium. Can you explain what revenge porn, or larger NCII, is, and why there was a need for such a helpline? Do you also work on other forms of image-based sexual abuse?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the question, also for the invitation to come and contribute to the panel with so many esteemed speakers too. So, the RPL, the Revenge Porn Helpline, and was established in the UK, and we did that on behalf of the UK's Home Office. Now, before I do start, and a disclaimer, if you like, so revenge porn is a title that we actually don't like at all. It doesn't really describe the issues that we're facing. So NCII very much is how we will refer to the particular issue. That said, it continues to be titled the Revenge Porn Helpline because that's how people we find will find the helpline and be able to find the support that they clearly very desperately need in those cases. So the helpline was introduced, let's say, to coincide with the new Criminal Justice Act that came into force in April 2015 in the UK, to make it an offence to post without consent someone's intimate image. And so, as been said, as Catherine said, in our case, the images are not illegal. It is the intent behind, or the consent, the lack of consent behind the intent to post content. I'd also add as well, so this last 10, 11 months, we have seen a marked increase in the caseload that the helpline are facing and are dealing with. So just to give you an idea, in 2019, they managed 1,681 cases. And in 2020, for the duration of 2020, they saw 3,146. We saw an 88% increase, including the early 3 months of 2020, which we didn't see a marked rise. So we have seen and continue to see a dramatic impact that COVID-19 and the restrictions have had on this particular issue. And we'll come on to, perhaps, if the opportunity arises, about some thoughts around that. So what the helpline does, we clearly provide support to those victims of NCII, providing some signposting as well to about the law. Equally, some advice and guidance in terms of approaching and engaging with the police in terms of preserving evidence, timeline of events, and as well as signposting and referring off to, if you like, sister support as well. So in terms of stalking, domestic abuse, or indeed mental health support. And then a big part of what we do is then acting to remove content where it exists. So again, to give you an idea, we have reported just over 150,000 images over the course of the duration of the helpline, of which we're a sort of 135,000 images removed. Of those, just under 90,000 were reported in the last 12 months. So again, a dramatic increase in terms of the COVID-19 restrictions that we've seen in this particular case. Just two sidelines, I'll just add. So do work with partners as well. So helping the Australian E-Safety Commissioner in setting up their helpline supporting victims as NCII, as well as in New Zealand too. And the question about other forms of image-based abuse, so particularly child sexual abuse, our partners, Internet Watch Foundation within the UK Safe Internet Centre, are actively manage that from a UK and indeed overseas perspective. So, Liesbet, that's what I think in terms of response to your particular question.
Thank you. Well, I would like to turn to the issue of deep nudes now. Deep nudes are photoshopped images that make a woman appear naked, even though she was not so in the original photo. And I say a woman and not a person, because de facto, women were the specific aim of this software. For example, in 2019, a software called Deep Nude could be purchased and allowed you to undress a woman in a photograph with a single click. This software only worked on women. But not long after its launch, the creator of Deep Nude stopped supporting the software because too many people were abusing it. The creator said to regret this, as he meant the app to be for entertainment purposes. And it does raise the question if Deep Nudes can ever be entertainment. David, can you explain to us why Deep Nudes are so problematic and how this relates to NCII?
Yeah, so a significant issue, and I think I will just look at gender in this particular case and give you some data, some information around the victims, the people that we're able to support in terms of the helpline. So from the last 12 months, 66.8% of those calling have been females. Males constitute just under 21% of those calling, and the remainder is we don't know. I would add as well, so of the cases that we deal with, the gender imbalance is significant. So overall, 84% of the cases involve where males are perpetrators and females are victims. And so, so significant bias towards that. The remainder, so females only appear in 10% in terms of perpetrators, but so significantly, say males have been 84% male perpetrator and female in terms of victim. I would add as well that the threat to share is as distressing in this particular case. Again, that's what we hear from those people that we support. The threat to share is as distressing in actual fact as sharing intimate images without consent. And so we do find a number of drivers behind that. So not least coercion, or indeed through coercion for either financial gain or indeed for more images as well. And that's what we've seen a particular rise during the COVID-19 restrictions. So 18% now of the cases that we receive involve some form of sextortion, which is so significantly higher than we've seen in the past. So I'm describing here, I mean, the impact that deep nudes or deepfakes that we see here, the context that we get in terms of, I'm describing this gender imbalance in terms of those that we're able to provide support for, as well in terms of image removal as well.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, you counseled the Belgian Parliament on the new law against NCII, yet during the debate there was no attention paid to the issue of deep nudes. Do you believe that this was a deliberate choice out of fear to open a new can of worms on the freedom of expression and humor? Or do you think there was just simply not enough awareness on this new threat?
I think what really happened also in the Parliament was to try to make legislation that was not depending on technology. So make it as technology neutral as possible. And that's actually a trend that you see in a lot of new legislation around the globe, that legislators are trying to look for some kind of holy grail, some kind of criminal provision that is neutral to the technology that is being used. And I think that was the main reason why deep nudes at that moment were not discussed, but also because it was at that point in time seen as something for the future. And the future was tomorrow, as we have seen with COVID-19. Because there I can really, I mean, I just follow David in that line, because we've seen it as well, that there's really been an explosion of NCII in the recent months. And also that we see that the revenge porn part of NCII is actually, it's there, but it's definitely not the majority. The majority is entertainment purposes, bullying of someone where you don't have an intimate relation with, or for financial reasons. And so we also see that those deep nudes are being used as well. And if you read some of the victim accounts of deep nude, you can also see that for them, the victimization is actually the same as if it were real images. Because and that might be different actually based on gender. What you see in all those victims accounts is that their main fear, at the moment it's not yet public, but their main fear is the secondary victimization. What happens when those images become public? It's not just the impact on the sexual integrity, but that they know, and that's also what we see in those cases, that afterwards a second wave actually of impact on them happens, because people will try to find out who these women are. And once they succeed in their doxing, once they succeed in exposing this person's identity, they actually are attacked online, often also offline. We see that from the numbers, 1/3 actually experiences offline impact of these images online. And that's really what they try to avoid. And so when you have a victim talking to you, the first thing they tell you when they're confronted with sextortion based on real images or on deep nude, the first question they ask is not prosecute, is not bring them to justice, is not attack this guy, the first question they always ask is, how do we prevent this coming online? Or if it's online, how can we get those images offline as soon as possible? So it's really that second wave of impact that's the real fear of the victim. And so whether it is deep nude or whether it is realistic images, it doesn't matter actually for the victim. So in that respect, I really think that we should look at legislation when we're drafting it, that it is actually technical neutral, and that the image and the realistic image of a person, that we are focusing on that aspect rather than whether it's the actual person. And where in Belgium we already had a wide perspective or a broad perspective on that because of child pornography, and we were confronted with actually those questions already on child pornography, and where we decided when it's a realistic depiction of a new child, this constitutes first CSAM, then that should be the same for NCII. But however, in other countries, it already, some courts had to decide on the issue, and where you see some courts really struggling because the provisions were maybe too detailed and too specific in stating that it should be the actual picture of a child. And if you translate that to NCII, then it will become really problematic once it concerns deep nude.
Okay, thank you. I think this makes clear that we definitely have to turn our attention on how online sexual integrity is best protected. Should policymakers opt for a legal approach and determine by law what is allowed and what is not? Or should policymakers opt for sensibilization and prevention? Cindy, given your extensive background, how do you feel about the tendency to fight image-based sexual abuse through laws? Do you feel like there should be more focus on sensibilization and prevention?
I can start sort of answering that question. In my previous life as a victim advocate, and when I was at the National Network to End Domestic Violence with the techsafety.org project, one of the things we encouraged everyone to do is address these very complex issues in a comprehensive way. So prevention, community education, raising boys and men to never, ever consider sharing an intimate image without permission and consent, prosecution, legal issues, all of those things, and then partnering with tech companies. And so back in 2015, as the revenge porn helpline in the UK was being formed, the same thing was happening in the US with CCRI. And our organization went to Facebook and said, this is an emerging issue, image-based abuse, can you help us? And Facebook actually convened a meeting of all of the major tech companies, Twitter, Reddit, you name it. And a handful of us nonprofits came into the room and said, this is causing people to lose sleep at night. We've had domestic violence offenders forever that have said, if you leave me, I will kill the family pet. I will kidnap the children. I will post those images and get you fired or humiliate you in front of your grandparents. And so we shared the harm that this causes, and every single tech company pretty much came out with policies within a few months, and Facebook took the lead to say this is harmful content and we don't want it on our platforms. And then Facebook went further and they started using photo matching technology, hashing, so that once you reported an image, you didn't have to keep reporting that same image over and over. You report it once, it gets hashed, and then it's prevented from appearing again. And then in 2018, we actually went further, and Facebook then started a pilot. And in fact, we're working with the UK Revenge Porn Helpline and many other partners, so that if a victim wants to, they can proactively hash their images, and then we make sure they never appear on Instagram or Facebook.
Thank you. Catherine, when counseling victims, you made use of privacy laws and human rights laws, as well as criminal law. Mm-hmm. Now you'll have to implement the criminal law as a public prosecutor. Surely you have an opinion on the effectiveness of the law criminalizing NCII and whether or not other options would be more efficient. Can you share your opinion on this with us, please?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's also the most challenging, and obviously the answer is always we should do both. It's very clear that, as I mentioned before, the first question a victim will ask is, how do I get those images offline? And so there, the cooperation with the internet service providers to make sure that those images get offline as soon as possible, so that there is no distribution. That should be our key. And the second key we should also have is changing how we talk about sex, sexual integrity and images, and on sexual education. And I'm really happy that Cindy mentioned it as well, that we should focus also on the children and our boys, how you deal with something that has been given to you in an intimate setting when you're doing sexting. So if we can prevent that, that would be great. But of course, in this context, we today see that is not the case, and the harm that is done by this kind of sexual distribution, or this distribution of sexual images, is of such impact. If you see in the numbers, and it's actually we see also in practice, it's 1 in 2 has suicidal thoughts after NCII. And only last week, a 13-year-old Dutch schoolgirl committed suicide due to the distribution of those images. And if you see that impact of actions, of course, a criminal law comes into play. However, the question is, where should we focus with criminal law? Because I mean, it might not always be the most suitable tool, but it's also unfeasible, because sometimes an image is shared by thousands of people, or even 10,000s of people. And obviously, first, we're not be able to prosecute all of them, but also from a societal approach, that is probably not what we should do. So we should have a priority. And my thinking would be that our priority should definitely be on those who have economic benefit of sharing those images, that those traders in trauma should definitely be prosecutors. And I'm not only thinking about people who actively engage in sextortion, but also in certain platforms that actually call for sending images of your girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend, or voyeurism platforms, and who benefit from the advertisements on those platforms. So I really think there should be our first focus, and a second focus, of course, on those people who really are wanting to cause harm. So obviously that will be the first person distributing that image. And there the criminal law can be and should be useful, given the enormous impact on the person in that perspective. But it's, of course, it's not enough, and the societal reaction should be there as well. And I see that schools are not yet on board, and that schools should actually also do more. Because often what we see now in schools is that either they don't know how to deal with it, and they see images of other students being distributed, but they remain silent, or actually they focus on the victim, and they try from all the best intent, but actually tell the victim, well, I hope you've learned some, and that next time you're more cautious. Or they talk to students saying, yeah, you need to be more cautious and watch out with sexting, etc. And that's with the best of intent, but it also gives the message to the other ones that the victim actually did something wrong. And so that it's okay that you distributed those images because the other one did something wrong. So I think it's and we're all in it, and it's prosecution, but that will only be a very small part of the answer.
Okay, thank you. Philipp, this is also a question on a European level, of course. So, and Europol has extensive experience in combating child sexual exploitation material. So do you have the same tools to combat NCII as you do to combat child sexual exploitation material?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And as you just said, our focus is really, and our experience and focus is in the area of child sexual exploitation, where consent is not a question. That's it's illegal, and there cannot be no consent can be given to the distribution and production of child sexual abuse material. So what we see there is we have very robust legislation in place when it comes to combating child sexual abuse online. We have also legislation. Most legislation, I would say, in the EU is also, as Catherine said, luckily, technology neutral. So it's quite robust. So we would also be able to deal with, deepfakes in that space. But just from our experience, also I think to echo what the other said is it's not a either or question. So we see the need for legislation, but also prevention, awareness, to get the message out there. And obviously working with industry, working with ISPs, the platform providers is key there. I think it's also important to harmonize that approach to the extent possible, where, for instance, at EU level, I mean, we have the 2011 Child Sexual Abuse Directive. We have a lot of legislation, harmonize that, make sure it gets transposed into international law. I think that's key. And then obviously going beyond that, working with other bodies such as the UN to address the problem. But also prevention. And I think, looking at some of the campaigns that we've created at EU level, in all the EU languages, some of them specifically focusing on child sexual abuse online, such as our Trace and Object initiative, where we sort of crowdsource some of the problem, where we ask the public to help us in identifying, geolocating some of the images, where we as investigators, hit a wall, so to speak. But I think our Say No campaign is actually, really directly linked to the problem of NCII, where we've developed a short video in all the EU languages highlighting, the problem linked to young people sharing images online, and looking at the two main sort of criminal models behind there, focusing again, looking at gender, young girls more targeted to produce material, and then that material is being used to extort more material and more extreme material, whereas young men, it's more about getting them to expose themselves, and then they're being extorted, so they have to pay money. But I think good experience there. As I said, it's for us focused on child sexual abuse mainly, but I think a lot of those experiences can be applied to NCII as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do agree that it will be also an issue on a European and international level, and that harmonizing will be very important. Let's turn to social media. What role should social media play in the protection of online sexual integrity? Should they themselves decide on what is allowed on their platforms, or should we leave those decisions to a lawmaker or a judge? David, every so often we read in the news about a social media platform or a porn website who enabled image-based sexual abuse through their platform. Do you feel social media could do more in the fight against NCII, and what should they do more?
It's a great question, and just before I do look at that, so I very much agree. So certainly the media coverage is significant in this particular area. There's no day goes by without some form of reference, at least in our experience, in terms of media coverage. In terms of why is that? So one of the numbers that we always find really shocking is in terms of those that reach the helpline. So through the annual reports that we published, 4% last year expressed some form of suicidal ideation. So in terms of impact of what this is, as Cindy mentioned earlier on, really helpfully, the impact is significant, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why the media coverage is so widespread. And perhaps what I'll do is I'll just read you out a couple of impact statements that we've had and comments that we've had from users of the helpline. Just kind of tries to just articulate the impact that we have. So I'll just read you two. So my mental health has suffered, and I've been investigated frequently at work as rumours of me have spread about me not working hard. It has had a catastrophic knock-on effect. Another one. I've been on antidepressants and anxiety medication for 10 plus years. I want my life back. I was suicidal twice in the past few months. I was so scared, and when it got bad, I had to think of the mental health issues it would cause my children if I did that. I have felt trapped for months. And so I think with that context of in terms of impact, so the question about what could be, what more could be done, or could there more be done, is the answer is always. We should always be striving to do more. The actions that Cindy highlighted, so applaud those, and indeed some of the actions that other countries have taken too. But there is, as I said, there's always more that we can do. I think so. Philipp explaining some of the aspects, and we can learn a lot from some of the efforts to identify and remove CSAM content. I think so. As I say, we can learn an awful lot about that in terms of the identification and indeed removal of that particular content. So perhaps the use of hashing technologies that would be more than helpful, and we'll probably get on to some of those specific examples in a bit. But certainly, I just wanted to kind of make the point that in terms of the impact that this has on individuals, that we learn, and we have the privilege of being able to help and support them through those very difficult and distressing times in their life.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, you've already mentioned some of the initiatives, and of course you have a background in advocating for women's rights online, even before you joined Facebook. Has your vision on the role of social media in the fight against NCII changed since you joined Facebook?
I don't think my vision has changed, but it's exciting to be on the inside and be able to work with engineers on improving our proactive detection and classifying and making sure we're getting content before it's ever even reported. Getting to work with our policy team at Facebook to make sure that our policies are hitting the right note, and if we need to tweak them, that we're working on that. And then I get to continue to work with amazing nonprofits all over the world, including the nonprofits I've already mentioned, plus the ECT commissions and institute in Belgium. And so I haven't had to lose or leave any of my longtime feminist friends, but we're also getting to work inside with tech folks to make a difference.
Okay, excellent. Could you, I find it really interesting what you say about working with engineers, because as the Institute is only just taking its first step in this issue, we are very well aware that it's also a highly technical issue, and that we, for example, are not equipped well enough to really engage in the technical discussions. And is that something that you found easy to talk about with the engineers at Facebook, and to find new and creative solutions for these problems relating to NCII?
We have so many teams at Facebook that are focused on women's safety in different ways, and they are passionate about getting it right. One of the things I'm proud of is that our machine learning classifiers are actually quite good at detecting nudity and near nudity and making sure that it's removed before anyone sees it. We know that a lot of victims of NCII are hesitant to report. So as much as possible, if our computers can detect that intimate images are being shared without consent, we want to pull them down as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. That is exciting, because we will need technological help to battle with this issue. That's clear, I'm afraid. Philipp, as a law enforcer at European level, I can imagine that you have some reservations about platforms like Facebook to decide themselves to remove certain content and thus possibly delete the proof that we need to prosecute. Could you elaborate a little bit on that issue?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really a question for policymakers and legislators. Obviously, when it comes to child sexual abuse material, we have great cooperation with the platforms. There is sort of no real question, whether that should be removed or not. And as Cindy said, there are great technical solutions out there that help us in doing so. But having said that, we have a very recent example, and I don't want to put Cindy on the spot, but unfortunately, the trilogue failed to reach an agreement for the temporary, derogation in relation to the e-privacy directive, which in essence makes it for most platforms illegal now to search, to apply things like, the DNA hashing approach and search for, in our case, child sexual abuse material. So some of them had said they'll do it. I don't know what Facebook's position on that is. So while technology will help us, we equally struggle with technology being used by platforms for very, very good reasons, such as end-to-end encryption, which equally, will create a lot of challenges for law enforcement. So, for instance, announcements to switch, to end-to-end encryption, knowing that this is for us, when I take a look at Facebook, one of the main sources of child abuse material that is being reported to us, that of course, for us raises a lot of questions. So there we really need to work very closely with platforms to say, how can we address that? In this case now, we really faced a very serious problem of, a sort of a gap, a legislative gap, if you will. And also the other problem that we face is technology. But again, this is policymakers and legislators. I think the key part is we need to work together, and ideally also come up with rules and regulations and norms, if you will. I'm sort of becoming very I'm not a lawyer, so excuse me if I'm using those terms sort of very freely. But the key part is whatever we do, we need to standardize as much as possible across all the different platforms. Because it doesn't help us if Facebook is the platinum standard. If other platforms don't follow that standard, then what will happen very naturally is that all sort of the NCII and child sexual abuse material and the distribution of that kind of content will then just migrate to those platforms. So it's really important to keep the discussion going, keep a very close interaction to find those solutions.
Well, thank you very much, Philipp. I think that's what we are, amongst other things, are trying to do here today. So thank you. I don't know whether you would like to respond, Cindy, on something Philipp said, or
sure.
Maybe.
He mentioned not wanting to put me on the spot, and that's perfectly fine. As a former victim advocate and social worker, I can chat all day about women's rights and ending misogyny, but when you get into legal issues, I'm going to pass that to my very smart and esteemed colleagues who know the ins and outs of those things.
Okay, excellent. I would like to turn, we are almost nearing the end of our panel, and I would like to turn to the question, what role do human rights organizations and equality bodies in this matter have? Because as I already mentioned, for example, for the Belgian Equality Body on Sex and Gender, the Institute, it is a new area that we were sort of dropped into, and it is clear that it has very serious gender aspects. But how should we, as an equality body or as a human rights organization, take up our role in these questions? David, you've worked for human rights on the internet for 25 years and cooperate with Facebook in their new pilot to provide them with pictures feared to be abused and to prevent them from being spread. Can you tell us a bit about the cooperation with social media and the legal authorities, and what we should take into account? What are the pitfalls and what are the opportunities, maybe?
Yes, thank you. And so the project, the pilot that you referred to, so not without my consent, the pilot that we've been involved with Facebook, really just tackles the prevention side. So, like I said, a significant proportion of those callers that we support are seeking support to do with the threats that they receive, rather than the images have actually been posted. But the pilot really kind of works with those individuals so that they can, if you like, we can identify, we can share, they can we can hash those images, create a digital fingerprint for those images that will then prevent, so in terms of from a Facebook perspective and Facebook platforms, that will then prevent that hashed image or that image being uploaded in the future. And so immediately that discharges the threat that those people are facing, which is a very empowering thing to be able to do, to give somebody a potential solution. So when someone is actually threatening to post your intimate images, that to be able to, like I say, to discharge that threat, albeit on three platforms, well, the Facebook platforms, is a very empowering thing to be able to share with those people in those difficult circumstances. And evidently as well, there is some mirroring. There's some understanding from what's been worked on with CSAM, child sex abuse material. Similar technologies kind of been applied in this particular case, but it's been very it's great for us to be involved in that particular pilot. And we've seen, it's supported so many different people, and for me, it's a great example about one of the aspects that we can kind of take forward. I think so. For us as well, as an organisation sitting and working, we're an NGO, we're a charity in the UK. And I think it plays a really important role, that kind of independent role between industry and indeed law enforcement as well. So one of the things I think we represent is, so that independence represents as well, is one of trust. So I think that some people perhaps would be a little nervous about sharing their images with either law enforcement directly or indeed with a tech provider. It can be a bit counterintuitive, but I think one of the things that we represent is a bit of insulation and a bit of trust that we bring to that equation. So through our work with those victims, to give them this avenue and to give them the process to follow in terms of they have that particular image, uploading that image in order for it to be hashed, and then that prevents that image being shared on those platforms. It is really good, and I think that's a great role that we, and a contribution that we can bring to this this particular equation.
Okay, thank you. It's very interesting to hear that you also think this independency is very important. Cindy, you work with organizations such as the UK Revenge Porn Helpline, and also with us, the Belgian Institute for the Equality of Women and Men. And we have a sort of privileged position with Facebook, meaning, for example, that we can be involved in determining that an image should not be allowed to be uploaded on Facebook. However, unlike some other platforms, Facebook does not immediately remove images when asked to do so by these organizations, by which I mean that Facebook still does a check if the image indeed violates the terms and conditions. Why does Facebook not intervene immediately if we say that an image is problematic? Could you explain a little bit?
Sure. There's probably many scenarios you're referencing there. I'm going to try to unpack a few of them. If somebody reports an image on the platform that's already been shared, it goes into a review queue and somebody looks and says, yes, that's an intimate image, hash and put that into our image bank so it doesn't get reshared. And then the other scenario is the pilot, where somebody proactively uploads an image that they want to make sure never appears on the platform. And that we do check to make sure that somebody's not using our proactive system to do harm, because you could also upload a picture of your political opponent to try to keep that from ever appearing on the platform using the same hashing technology. So there's a quick review. Yes, it's an intimate image, it's sensitive, and then it's deleted, it's hashed and then deleted immediately. And then the only thing we keep is those hash images. So that is, the way we do it right now. There is a review process. And then once somebody tries to upload that image, one of the things I'm most excited about is we'll block that image from being posted, but we also message the perpetrator to say what you're sharing violates our community standards. We take sexual violence and sexual exploitation very seriously. It may be illegal and you may lose access to the platform if you continue. What I like about that is we know that violence against women occurs because it's silently condoned. If we're not condemning it, we're, as a society, we're allowing it. And so by messaging a perpetrator and saying this is unacceptable behavior, we're potentially educating and changing social norms.
Absolutely. I must say that we are also very enthusiastic about this pilot project, and we hope it will be implemented in the whole world as soon as possible. David, do you wish that human rights organizations or equality bodies such as, or independent NGOs working in this field, do you wish they would have the competency to qualify an image as illegal, and that everyone then has to act accordingly without a prior intervention from a judge?
So there's a really important question, and I would add as well. So before, specifically answering the question, I think so. We work with a variety of different providers. So wherever we have content, NCII content reported to us by individuals, we will seek to remove that content. And clearly that spans the spectrum of tech providers. And we have a variety of different, or we encounter a variety of different responses. So there are, as Cindy's explained, there are some providers who are proactive in this particular case. Equally, we see particularly bulletin boards being a sort of destination or a popular host for this sort of content. Some adult content sites as well, so where self-generated content can be uploaded. We've seen them hosting quite a lot of content. In some cases, we've seen providers act purely on our report, so immediately to remove content where we've reported it. We've also then, as you might expect, got the full spectrum of providers who may well, if I'm kind, probably take their time to respond to us. Indeed, we have some providers who we can't get a response out of, and more often than not, that's well beyond any jurisdiction that we can afford, we can actually affect, and that's really difficult and frustrating. So where we've identified an image and the ability to not remove it on behalf of those people and the distress that those people have, is one thing that I would dearly love to respond, to be able to fix in one form. And so the rollout of those sorts of technologies that that you mentioned earlier on, we talked about in terms of pilots, to have some form of global hashing list, similar to that CSAM has developed over the years. So to do something like that would be amazing, and then providers are then subject to have access to and be able to remove that sort of content. And where we add images onto that list, or indeed URL list, you know, if there's filter engines or filter systems, filter lists that are created to have some form of NCII URL list that providers can integrate into their platform, such that if we can't get that content removed, we can at least minimize its availability to people, and therefore reduce the distress that is afforded to some people. So that would be my response. I think so. We're very adept at being able to identify, classify particular images, and like I say, some providers do immediately or automatically respond to reports that we make through some form of trusted flagger process. To automate that would be an advantage. And like I say, I think what we and others like us represent is that independence and the trust that we bridge between providers, law enforcement, and indeed victims of NCII.
Okay, thank you very much for those insightful answers. We are coming to the nearer to the end of this session. We've been very good with our timing, so we still have some time for questions. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask the technical support team. I don't see whether there already are any questions. Does that mean that there are none? Okay. Okay. I don't see those questions. Okay, there are the questions. So first question is, how do you safeguard the involvement of tech companies to be limited to the prevention of intimate images and deepfakes if the same techniques can contribute to censorship exercised by the private companies? Anyone who wants to take that question? Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, obviously, in all the discussions that we're having on the role of internet service providers, there's always a question of censorship, and in particular, of course, private censorship, because there's no judge intervening, and it's not the public standards, it are actually private standards. And for me as well, NCII is also a form of hate speech. So then we're drawing as well to the discussion on hate speech and freedom of expression and information. However, it is a specific kind of hate speech in the sense that it is image-based. And in that regard, I think it's actually much easier to have that discussion than we're having on other forms of hate speech, because an image as such is not so much of an opinion. So the issue of freedom of expression is less involved here. What the potential threat would be is that we would have some kind of new morals or new standards of how a woman should or man should behave online. And of course, what we should maintain is that every person should have the freedom to express him or her online as he deems fit. And also, of course, if they want to actually be online in adult videos or in an exposed image, that's their absolute choice. And that's also the reason that for all standards, for all legislation, for all standards within ISPs, the only issue should be the consent. And so that if a person did not provide for consent for the distribution of those images, whether they are nude, whether they are simply sexy, whether they are in sexual intercourse, it is consent what matters. And so it's not the standard, and that's where I started as well, or standard should not be, as it were, indecency or public morals. Our standard should be consent. And that's the only question for me that is relevant. And of course, I mean, the platforms have other standards as well that they can apply. For example, a platform such as Facebook that is more portraying to the general public and knows that there are also minors on their platform, that they have other standards as what is allowed, for example, than in comparison to adult platforms, that is to a certain extent also acceptable. However, for me, the main issue should always be the element of consent. And in that perspective, of course, differs purposefully from other forms of hate speech, where it's, of course, not the consent issue, but the harm that is being done, the incitement to hate and violence. That is the standard that we apply. And of course, there you have much more leeway to discuss what is allowed in a democracy, what is allowed in democratic debate, than you have with abuse images. However, that being said, and Cindy already mentioned it, there's also we've also seen abuse from the protection against NCII. For example, certain men alarming that there is a picture that they deem sexy from a sister, a friend, a former partner, which actually was put online with consent. So there is a danger. However, for me, the danger is less problematic than in the other debates on hate speech. So that we are more preventive when taking away or removing pictures online is, for me, absolutely justified in this debate.
Okay. We have some questions also on the interesting pilot project of Facebook. One person asked, in how far is a person's likeness protected? If the hair color is changed, or the eye color is changed, or the length of the hair is changed, will this still be considered, or will this still be picked up as the same image? And another question is relating to what happens when such an image that has been hashed and that cannot be uploaded again, when Facebook notices that someone is trying to upload it again. We've already heard that person will be warned about what he or she is doing, but will also the victim be warned that someone is trying to upload the image again? And if so, can Facebook also provide information on who tried to upload it, so that the victim can decide whether or not to file a complaint with the police? I think difficult questions, Cindy.
I'll start with the second question. And one of the things that we are very clear about is that once an image is hashed and the image is destroyed and deleted, we don't can add any identity to that hash, because victims would be quite freaked out if they thought that we were sitting on something connected to them. And so once we have those hashes in the data bank, we don't know which victim it is, and we're not connecting it back, which is for their privacy and anonymity. But it also means that we don't know which victim, and we're not able to connect back to them. What we do have, though, is a law enforcement portal, and very often offenders are quite brazen, and they boast about the fact that they're sharing their ex's photos and they're sending it to their friends. And so if it's reported and police use the law enforcement portal, they can get the evidence they need to help prosecute a case. So we encourage law enforcement to work with our law enforcement response team, LERT, and make sure that evidence is happening. On the first question about the pilot and the hashing, I'm going to be careful here, because the last thing I want to do is train stalkers and abusers how to get around our system. But we do know that the hashing works even if there are some minor changes. If there are major changes, we'll need to have the victim resubmit the photo to be hashed again. And we're happy to take as many versions of an image as possible. If it's been cropped, if it's been framed, we will take them all and we'll hash them all and make sure that no version of that photo can show up on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to? Yes, David, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's actually a more of a response to the first question, and to follow on from what Catherine said, and in connection with the safeguarding involvement of tech companies to the prevention of intimate images. I think, and I will just sort of cite one of the things that I said earlier, mentioned earlier on. You know, the role of helplines and others like us around the world. This role of sitting alongside, working with tech companies, working with law enforcement, and that I think that independence is a particularly important aspect. Whether perhaps this is, may I suggest, so representing some form of trust and an independence from each of those organisations will also help with the whole kind of equation, I think, in terms of safeguarding as the question's being couched here as well. So that I think is, I'd just like to reinforce in terms of response to that question, following on from the points that Catherine made as well.
Okay. There is one interesting question on an app that's called the Digital Condom. It was launched by the Belgian telephone company to make sexting more safe. This app allows people to tag their photos with a watermark containing the name and the phone number of the person who will receive the picture. If the recipient then shares the picture, it will be traceable. Can these kind of solutions offer some accountability? What do you think as experts? Anyone who would like to take that question?
Maybe I'll take the question also, because of course I know the pilot. So it's a pilot by a mobile and digital operator, a major one, where they provided for some kind of application whereby if you're sending sexting, that it would, if you would distribute it further, or the recipient would distribute it further, that it would not be possible, or the image would be changed. Of course, as you can imagine, not so long afterwards, some workarounds of that, a kind of prevention of further distribution, were developed as well by some people online. However, of course, a vast part of the recipients wouldn't have the technology or the technological notice or knowledge to really circumvent. So I think those kind of, voluntary proposals by industry, because that is really what it was, are very helpful. And we really need the industry to think along as well, not just how to remove images, but also to how to prevent it. And definitely for youngsters, for minors who engage in sexting, this can actually be a tool that they can use. Obviously, we're not yet there, and it's not. I mean, it's still not the equivalent of a condom as it was portrayed first. But I think it's really helpful, and that also, and what I actually liked about that project was that it was accompanied as well with some campaign also to youngsters and also to schools, how to deal with sexting and to make youngsters actually aware of the dangers of sexting, and to have some experts speaking on those topics. So definitely when such kind of proposal that could help youngsters comes along with a campaign that also considers the issue, then I really think it's very, very helpful. And we definitely should, working with industry in this field has been, for me, previously as a lawyer, but also now in prosecution, has actually been a very, very positive experience, seeing that a lot of the industry is actually aware of the problem and is working along to provide answers. And one of the examples recently was, of course, Pornhub, where after some articles also in the New York Times, they decided to delete a vast part of what's online on Pornhub because it constituted NCII or CSAM. And so you can also see that public campaigning can have its effect as well on those platforms. And of course, we're looking at the Facebooks and the Twitters, etc. But let's not forget that the vast part of NCII is still uploaded on these kind of either maverick platforms or on adult platforms. So they should fall within our field of cooperation as well. Even for gender equality bodies, where often, I mean, adult sites are not their natural partners, I see them reaching out to each other to keep that clean as well.
Okay. I think with that, oh, David, you still go
Yeah,
ahead. We have
okay,
1 or 2 minutes.
If I may, so Catherine, I couldn't agree more. I think, so where we've seen these sorts of initiatives, this kind of technology that's applied, we've seen examples in the past, particularly where children are involved, where the ingenuity of children, as soon as you get some form of what is apparently a safeguard, there is a workaround, and I think that there is a danger of a false sense of security that could be what we've seen that's occurred in the past. And so I have little doubt that there is something that will be created, or either mechanism or process that will be created to work around these sorts of things. Indeed, you could actually foresee these sorts of things actually being not just used as safety, but also as a form of further abuse to somebody, to a third party. So I admire the ingenuity and the thought about it, but always kind of worried when there is a wholly tech solution that is portrayed as a silver bullet. I think that can lead to, like I say, a false sense of security. Okay.
And I think, in all honesty, with that we have to end the session here. I would like to thank all the speakers very, very much for their presence and their very interesting answers to these difficult questions. And I wish you all a great lunch in a few minutes. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.